My Thakur's deep affinity for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is rooted in their shared family lineage. You know, my Thakur's maternal family shared the same ancestry as that of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's. You have heard it? Don't you? Okay, let me explain. Let me elaborate. Vishnudas Thakur was the maternal uncle of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. His son was Gopal Das, and the succeeding generations of that lineage followed in succession, like Rajiv Lochon, Ramkrishna, Ramchandra, Ramdev, Balaram, Ram Shankar, Ramkinkar Siddhanta, Haranath Shiromani, and then comes Ambikanath Vidyabhushan. This Ambikanath Vidyabhushan was the maternal grandfather of my Thakur. His third daughter, Charushila Devi, was Thakur's mother. So, it is through this sacred lineage that my Thakur and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu are bound by family ties. Understood? Same maternal lineage. But if you look past this ancestral tie and delve deeply into the spiritual philosophies of my Thakur and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, you will be able to uncover a vast and striking difference between their spiritual understanding and philosophical visions. Okay? Now, what is my Thakur's philosophy? What do I mean by my Thakur's spiritual philosophy? My Thakur often said that Dharma হচ্ছে বিজ্ঞান ভিত্তিক, যুক্তি ভিত্তিক, গণিত ভিত্তিক, সুর ভিত্তিক। ধর্মে ভাব, উচ্ছ্বাস, গল্প, কল্পনার কোনো স্থান নেই। It means that religion in general and spirituality in particular should be rooted absolutely in the spirit and ethos of science, logic, mathematics, and universal tune. Moreover, in the path of religion and spirituality, my Thakur used to say that there is no place for irrational sentimentality. There is no place for emotional tendencies that are not tempered with logic. No place for pure imaginary mythical stories. No place for, say, blind faith or unfounded convictions. Okay? He used to say, my Thakur used to say, ধর্ম হচ্ছে বিজ্ঞান ভিত্তিক, যুক্তি ভিত্তিক, গণিত ভিত্তিক, সুর ভিত্তিক। ধর্মে ভাব, উচ্ছ্বাস, গল্প, কল্পনার কোনো স্থান নেই। Now, these two sentences do not merely capture very successfully my Thakur's entire spiritual outlook and philosophy. If you observe my Thakur's personality with deep attentiveness, you will realize that the very seed and foundation of his core personal character lies within this statement. So, to truly grasp the essence and depth of my Thakur's personality and vision, it is extremely important and vital to realize the inner meaning and the core truth of this statement from my Thakur. ধর্ম হচ্ছে বিজ্ঞান ভিত্তিক, যুক্তি ভিত্তিক, গণিত ভিত্তিক, সুর ভিত্তিক। আর ধর্মে ভাব, উচ্ছ্বাস, গল্প, কল্পনার কোনো স্থান নেই। Now, let's turn towards the philosophy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The philosophy associated with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is widely known as Achinta Bhedabhed. Though he himself played no part in structuring its formal theoretical framework. It was long after his passing that the Gaudiya Vaishnava school or the doctrine of Achinta Bhedabhed was systematically established. Chiefly, through the efforts of the 6 Goswamis, known as Sanatan Goswami, Rup Goswami, Raghunath Das Goswami, Gopal Bhatta Goswami, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, and I would say mainly through Sri Jeev Goswami. To truly appreciate the philosophy of Achinta Vedaved, we need to travel back in time. As you may know, there are 6 orthodox schools of thought rooted in the Vedas: Shankha, Jog, Vaisheshik, Nyaya, Purva Mimamsa, and Uttar Mimamsa. While the Purva Mimamsa focuses primarily on the ritualistic section or the Karmakanda of the Vedas, the Uttar Mimamsa centers on the philosophical section, the Gyan Kanda, which is commonly known as Vedanta. This Vedantic thought later branched out into 2 major schools, Advaita or non-dualistic Vedanta and Dvaita or dualistic Vedanta. The Upanishads formed the core of this Vedanta. Over time, the number of Upanishads swelled to well over 100. Among these, Adi Shankaracharya selected 10, or according to some scholars 11, and recognized them as the principal major Upanishads. They are namely Isha, Keno, Mandukya, Mundak, Chandogya, Katha, Brihadaranyaka, Taittiriya, Aitareya, Kaushitaki, and Shvetasvatara. But it is an accepted fact that there are 108, or according to some scholars, 128 or even more number of Upanishads. However, reading and internalizing all 108 or 128 Upanishads proved to be an immensely daunting, time-consuming task, not just for ordinary people, but even for the brilliant scholars and the elevated spiritual seekers. Recognizing this, Rishi Badarayan sought to distill the core essence of the Upanishads into 555 concise aphorisms or sutras, which came to be known as the Brahma Sutras. These sutras or aphorisms are so concise, profound, subtle, and often cryptic that their interpretations naturally gave birth to a multitude of commentaries. From Acharya Shankar's exposition of the Brahma Sutras, we derived Advaita Vedanta. Shankar lived between 788 and 820. He lived for only 32 years, His philosophy posits a singular ultimate reality. Brahma alone is true, the phenomenal world is an illusion, and the individual soul or the Jivatta is identical to Brahma, sharing no distinction whatsoever. Because Acharya Shankar's philosophy recognizes only one supreme reality, it is known as Advaita. Subsequently arose Ramanujacharya, who lived between 1017 and 1137, who propounded Vishishtadvaita or qualified non-dualism. A man of profound devotion, Acharya Ramanuj acknowledged the divine existence of a personal God, viewing the individual soul as an integral part of Brahma. Understood? You all know it. You all know this, no? Ramanuj recognized the dynamic power of Brahma, thereby accepting Maya or illusion under specific conditions. His deities of adoration were Vishnu and Lakshmi, though here Lakshmi is not equal to Vishnu, but rather Lakshmi devotedly subordinate to Lord Vishnu. Understood? Ramanujacharya placed Vishnu on a higher pedestal than Lakshmi. Next came Madhvacharya. He lived between 1238 and 1317. He explicitly advocated Dvaita, or dualism, asserting that God and the individual soul are two mutually exclusive realities. One must also mention Vallabhacharya's philosophy of Shuddha Dvaita. Vallabhacharya was almost contemporary to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He lived between 1478 and 1530. His philosophy was Pushti Margo. He was contemporary with Sri Chaitanya. Now, in these dualistic schools of Vedanta, grasping the concept of the two is essential. For without duality, the sweetness, depth, and significance of devotion and divine love, by devotion I mean bhakti, and divine love I mean prem, on the spiritual, these two ideas would cease to exist. The idea of bhakti and the idea of prem. Understood? Indeed, without understanding this fundamental duality, the philosophy of Achinta Vedaved cannot be truly comprehended. Look, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu left behind virtually nothing in writing. The only authentic records we have are a mere 8 verses, which the Gaudiya Vaishnavas call Shikhashtakam, attributed directly to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. What does it mean? That Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wrote only 8 verses, and nothing more than that. This is an accepted truth. This marks a profound difference between Chaitanya and my Thakur. Throughout his life, my Thakur produced a vast body of spiritual and philosophical work. Even when he did not physically write, he dictated his thoughts or delivered discourses that were recorded by his associates. Consequently, my Thakur has bequeathed to us an immense treasury of philosophy and insights, leaving no room for ambiguity regarding his spiritual and philosophical vision. In contrast, because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did not leave behind any written philosophical treatises of his own, defining his exact philosophy becomes a somewhat challenging endeavor. It was his followers who later formulated and presented the spiritual philosophy of Achinta Vedaved as the definitive doctrine of Chaitanya. The 6 Goswamis, as I mentioned earlier, asserted that Chaitanya's very life was his philosophy, serving as the foundational bedrock for the Achinta Vedaved doctrine. Now, let's look into this concept of Vedaved, which means roughly simultaneous oneness and difference. This Vedaved was by no means a novel invention. This Vedaved concept was not invented by Chaitanya or by his followers. It existed long before the era of even Adi Shankaracharya. This idea was historically championed by figures like Aurmali or Bhartra Prapancha, and it was later propagated after Shankar's time by Nimbarkacharya under the nomenclature of Dvaita Dvaita, which can be roughly translated as dualistic non-dualism. The core tenet of Vedaved or Dvaita Dvaita is that the divine or the Ishwar and the individual soul or the Jeev coexist in a state that is simultaneously distinct and non-distinct. Okay? Given that Nimbarkacharya's timeline is generally traced back to 1130 to 1200, it is evident that the Dvaita Dvaita or Vedaved school of thought was conceived long before Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. What the 6 Goswamis, the ardent disciples of Mahaprabhu, did was prefix this existing Vedaved concept with the word Achinta. Achinta can be roughly translated as the inconceivable, thereby branding this philosophy as Achinta Vedaved Tattva. According to the exposition, the essence of this inconceivability lies in the fact that this truth does not belong to the mundane material world. Rather, it belongs entirely to the transcendental dream of bhav or divine emotion and Rosh or spiritual mellows. Understood? Now, it is crucial to understand a fundamental distinction here. The successive emergence of the dualistic schools of Vedanta, founded by Ramanuj, Madhav, Nimbark, and Vallabh, were all deeply anchored in the Prasthantraya, the three foundational pillars which are the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutras, and the Bhagavad Gita. To establish a valid school of spiritual thought, one had to demonstrate that their philosophical doctrines were authenticated by these three foundational pillars. Okay? Understood? Chaitanya, however, deviated from this tradition. Rather than according primary importance to these three established sources, he introduced a fourth prasthan, what his followers call the Rasha Prasthan or the Bhav Prasthan, the path of emotional devotion. Instead of seeking validation from the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutras, or the Gita, Chaitanya elevated the Srimad Bhagavad Puran to the highest echelon of scriptural authority, proclaiming the Bhagavad Puran to be the most natural and unadulterated commentary on the Vedanta Sutras. Now, isn't it funny? It is precisely because of this departure from traditional scriptural consensus that other orthodox sects often viewed Chaitanya's philosophy with a degree of reservation. Now, long after Chaitanya's passing in 1718, a scholar named Baladev Vidyabhushan attempted to bridge this gap. Grounded in the doctrine of Achintya Vedaved, he composed a formal documentary on the Brahma Sutras known as the Govinda Bhashya. In my estimation, however, this commentary remains intellectually very fragile. When measured against the sheer philosophical loftiness, analytical subtlety, and profound genius of the commentaries laid down by Shankar, Ramanuj, Madhav, or Nimbark, the Govinda Bhashya is extremely pale in comparison and fail to hold its ground. Okay? Understood? I have already mentioned that although the philosophy of Achintya Vedaved is widely attributed to Chaitanya, its formal theoretical framework was constructed long after his passing by the six Goswamis. No? Primarily, Sri Jiva Goswami. The foundational bedrock of this philosophy is Sri Jiva Goswami's monumental work, the Short Sandarbha. Given the exhaustive length of Short Sandarbha, this treatise, he later authored a concise compendium titled Sarva Sambhadini, which contains the very first historical mention of the term Achintya Vedaved. Now, this word Achintya Vedaved came long after the passing of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Now, this Achintya Vedaved posits that the Supreme Reality, Ishwar, and the individual soul, Jeev, coexist in a state of simultaneous oneness and difference, which has already been claimed some 500 years ago from the time of Chaitanya by Nimbarkacharya. However, this dual nature, according to the six Goswamis, is deemed Achintya, inconceivable and beyond the grasp of mundane human intellect. While this doctrine aligns with Ramanuja's Vishishtadvaitavad in acknowledging the cosmic energy, the Shakti, it diverges significantly in its execution. In Ramanujacharya's view, Goddess Lakshmi remains subordinate to Lord Narayan. In the Achintya Vedaved view, the divine and his energy are absolutely equal. Radha and Krishna represent this equally distinct duality. When they merge into non-dual oneness, they are manifested as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Understood? This shift towards Bhav and Rosh intellectually, rather than anchoring his doctrine in the traditional canonical texts like the Upanishads, Brahma Sutras, or the Bhagavad Gita, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu elevated the Srimad Bhagavad Puran as the supreme authority. Through this, he chose to anchor his core spiritual philosophy not in rigid dialectics, but realms of divine emotion or bhav and rapture, which you may call Rosh. Look, this is precisely where the fundamental divergence begins between my Thakur's spiritual philosophy and that of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. While emotional ecstasy or sentimental fervor finds no place in my Thakur's contemplation, Chaitanya's philosophy rests almost entirely upon the experience of bhav or Rosh. It is for this very reason that while my Thakur perceives Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as highly intellectual and intelligent, I hold a radically different view from my Thakur on this matter. If someone elevates mythological lore above core spiritual philosophy, their intellect can hardly be deemed profound, isn't it? Furthermore, it would be a grave error to seek a parallel between the doctrine of Achinta Vedabhed, which suggests that God simultaneously exists and does not exist, and my Thakur's profound assertion that one can neither say God exists nor say he does not. What my Thakur says is that one can neither assert that God exists nor claim that he does not. When my Thakur speaks of God not existing, he is not referring to atheism. Rather, he implies that nothing exists but you, which is the essence of non-duality or Dvaita. Conversely, asserting that God exists represents duality or Dvaita. Chaitanya, however, suggests that both dimensions coexist simultaneously, which is sort of an absurdity. The dualities we experience, say joy and sorrow or pleasure and pain, exist solely to crystallize and solidify that supreme consciousness of which we are a part. Yet, when one ascends to an incredibly subtle spiritual plane, the mind can no longer generate these dualities. Even so, as consciousness continuously seeks to solidify itself further, this profound concept, where one can neither say God is, nor that he is not, becomes immensely powerful. Understood?